You're listening to episode 126 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Dr. Cynthia Price joins us to speak about the study Mindful Awareness in Body-Oriented Therapy for Women in Substance Use Disorder Treatment. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this is made possible from your generosity and the generosity of others like you. I want to thank those of you who are making monthly donations to keep this podcast going. And if you're not yet, please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation. One-time or especially monthly donations show you value this work, which can't happen without you. Thank you for your help, your support, and your kind generosity. Have you ever felt disconnected, perhaps even dissociated from your body? This can happen for many reasons, some benign and some rooted in the experiences during one's lifetime, like trauma. Mindfulness can be a way to reconnect, and though getting through those waters can be difficult and does benefit from the guidance of a competent professional, it can be done. Cynthia Price, PhD, MA, LMP, is a research associate professor at the University of Washington. Cynthia's research and clinical expertise is in the acquisition of interoceptive awareness. In private practice for 20 years, she developed Mindful Awareness in Body-Oriented Therapy, or MABT, to teach interoceptive awareness and related skills for self-care and emotion regulation. Her research program is focused on studying the efficacy and mechanisms of MABT for distressed populations. The majority of her work focuses on community-based research for individuals who are disconnected from their bodies due to substance use, trauma, or pain. She is the director of the Center for Mindful Body Awareness, a nonprofit focused on teaching MABT and integrating mindful body awareness education into programs for underserved populations. Our guest today is Dr. Cynthia Price. Cynthia, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
So let's dive right in. I want you to tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I'm now a research professor at the University of Washington, but I started out in my early 20s as a massage therapist, and in the course of being in private practice, I realized I was working with a lot of emotional issues with my clients and went back to school to get a master's in counseling psychology, not in order to do traditional talk therapy, but to bring those skills into more of a body psychotherapy approach that continued to use touch. So I was in practice for almost 20 years and worked a lot with people who are disconnected from their bodies due to various things but a lot of trauma, a lot of physical and sexual trauma, and the clients I was working with, a lot of chronic pain. And at some point in there, I decided I really was interested in bringing this work to more people than who I could reach in my private practice. And I'm trying to legitimize this type of work in some way because it seemed to be so useful to folks. And now, unexpectedly sort of almost decided, well, one way to do that was research and maybe I should go back to school. So that's what I ended up doing. And that's what brought me to the University of Washington, was to really learn how to do intervention research so I could study exactly what I had been doing in practice all these years, or more or less. Of course, when you're doing research, you create, which is what I did, create a research protocol for an intervention that is very contained, not like clinical practice, which you can see people for a very long time. So that's kind of how I got here and what my background is.
So how about mindfulness? How did you first encounter that? Because it seems to be a pivotal role in what you've developed.
Yeah. Well, it's when I first started college, I was a religion major, and I learned about Buddhism within the context of being a religion major. But I would have to say that a lot of how I understand my own association with mindfulness and this work doesn't come from there at all. It comes from really working in presence as a body worker, and throughout my 20 years of practice, and training and focusing, which is Eugene Genlin's work, which was very much about helping people create, get in touch with their present moment awareness in the body. But I think so much of what my relationship to mindfulness is comes out of my practice and working with clients in that way.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about what it is that you've developed. Tell us about mindful awareness in body-oriented therapy.
Okay. So this is an approach. It's basically an 8-week intervention, like so many mindfulness-based interventions, that is really designed to teach people very fundamental skills of accessing their capacity to accessing sensory awareness. So their inner bodily experience, physical sensations, emotional sensations. That's really sort of what interoceptive awareness means. So mindful awareness and body-oriented therapy is about helping people to develop fundamental skills of interoceptive awareness. And this intervention was really designed out of my experience clinically of working with people who were pretty disconnected from their bodies. So they didn't know how to do that. And when you work a lot with people with trauma histories or a lot of people with chronic pain, that is very common. And so not to say that this work isn't really helpful for people who who are healthier, who may not have that level of disconnection that so many people do who have chronic pain or really high levels of stress or a trauma history. But it really is designed to facilitate that capacity and kind of coming back to being able to really easily, or at least with more ease, connect in with somatic experience, to bring attention very consciously and very deliberately into places in the body and develop the capacity to stay there in a very mindful way, meditative way, observing compassionately whatever is happening inside. And so we teach people how to do that through this approach in an incremental way. We start sort of more on the exterior of the body, you could say, with developing the capacity to actually put language to sensation, which isn't easy for everybody. And then move from there into developing the capacity to notice sensation in the body in an internal way through some exercises. using breath, using intention. And then we move into really more of the meditation piece of helping someone bring their attention into very identified places, like I'm going to go into the heart region in the center of my chest, or I'm going to go into my belly, or I'm going to go in the middle of my throat, or wherever it is that person has symptoms or has a sense of disease or whatever, some sense of emotional holding for them, to go into that place and develop the capacity to actually stay there and attend to how it feels to be there, what they notice, how it shifts when they're able to stay there. So, and our experience is that we're really teaching people the baby steps or over time in order to really develop the capacity to do that. So that's why we start kind of more externally on the body, then work with exercises, and then work with the more meditative components. And all of this uses touch to help people really bring their attention to their body, to help them bring their attention back to their body when they start to float out or start thinking. So it's a very much a combination of manual, psychoeducational, and mindfulness to kind of all together.
Thank you. And I'm really interested in hearing about this recent study on MABT for women in substance use disorder treatment. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that study. What made you decide to work with this particular group?
Well, I didn't have a really strong I didn't have a lot of clinical expertise working with people with substance use disorder, but when I was a postdoc, I was funded on a grant from the National Institute of Drug Abuse for my postdoc. So I learned about substance abuse and substance abuse treatment at that time, and then the expectation of that postdoc was that we would write a grant that would go to the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And at the time, they were looking for, specifically, they were looking for studies in complementary and alternative medicine. So I wrote a grant that got funded. So this is a lot of years ago. And that was my first study with women in substance use disorder treatment. It was the first study that I had done with that population. And it was small. And we got some pretty promising results. And so that's how I got started. And the truth is that where my clinical expertise is strongest is with trauma. And all of these women, 100% of these women have trauma histories. So, you know, my own personal interest is very much, it very much overlaps with this population because of that in large part. But so this study that you're referring to is the follow-up to that. This was a larger sort of 5-year process, a study that we implemented in 3 community clinics in the Seattle area, all for women who were in outpatient treatment for substance use disorder. So they could have been, you know, addicted to alcohol or opiates or amphetamines or meth, you know, or multiple things that they were using, but they were in an abstinence-based outpatient treatment. And we did our study at their clinics. The intervention happened at their clinics. And yeah, so that's how that got started.
One of the things you mentioned that stood out for me was that there was a very strong corollary between trauma and substance abuse. Mm-hmm. And in your work with trauma and chronic pain and other things of that nature, I'm wondering if part of what your design of the program, perhaps your design of the study, is really getting at the root of how you use the program and your course to really get at the roots of the trauma, and then the release from the addictions follow from that. Is that part of what you're doing?
Absolutely. I mean, without maybe being explicit about it, right? The
Yeah.
women that we see, and especially in community-based treatment, and certainly for this study, they have had very, very little mental health support for their trauma. So, some of these women have, they've got abuse histories that started when they were children and then continued into their relationships. And you add on to that if they've been using drugs on the street, having other kinds of violence that they're exposed to. So it's pretty pervasive, and then it doesn't get dealt with, and they end up in treatment for substance use, but they're usually haven't really had any treatment of their other trauma or any other kind of related mental health conditions at all. So when we're doing this work, that's usually what they bump into. Absolutely, that's what they bump into. They bump into, when you're asking people to pay attention to their bodies, and the typical, very common, normal kind of human response to protect ourselves from emotional pain is to dissociate from our bodies, and so that we can get through our daily lives. So that's what they bump into is, this isn't comfortable for me, and I have no idea how I feel. And, and as they learn these skills and they become more aware of how they feel, and they start making the links between things like, oh, I feel really sad in this part of my body. And that sadness, they can start making other kinds of links for themselves around, well, that sadness is left over from X or Y or whatever. And just them then noticing, oh, this is a real trigger for me. I used to use rather because I didn't know how to feel sadness in my body. So I would go out and use substances. And this is allowing me the space to actually be with my feelings, to know that I can, to know that it's safe in my body to do this and not need to use, and to learn how to feel all of that. And so that is exactly what happens. And I think it really is I really do think for a lot of these folks, the trauma is what's behind their use.
Yeah. So when you're doing a guidance of a meditation in your program and understanding that touch is part of this, is it sometimes a bit surprising for the participants when those emotional revelations come about?
It's often surprising, but it's surprising in different ways. For people, sometimes it's surprising that they're not used to feeling a positive relationship to their bodies sometimes. So when they discover that, oh my gosh, not only can something feel sad and I can be with it, and then that feels good. Like there's a way in which that sadness shifts for me, and my sense of myself and my body shifts in a way that actually makes me feel more whole, that makes me feel more empowered or strong in myself. That's often a surprise for people in a really lovely way. So that's a common kind of story, and one that is enormously satisfying as the therapist to watch happen, and is very impactful for the participant.
So for this particular paper and this particular study, tell us a little bit about the structure. What was it that you did, and especially what ended up being the results? What are you seeing from this?
So this study, as I said, it took place in these community clinics. So there was a research coordinator who basically lived at the clinic and recruited women from their therapy groups for the study. And if they were interested, after they'd finished, filled out a set of questionnaires, they were randomized to one of 3 treatment groups. So all women in this study were in abstinence-based treatment. And so this study was looking at our intervention, mindful awareness and body-oriented therapy, in addition to treatment as usual. So it's called an adjunctive treatment. It's on top of what they're already getting. And we also had another intervention that we offered, which was a women's health curriculum. And that was designed as what's called an active control to basically see whether having the extra time and attention might explain the results, or was MABT doing something in addition. So all the women in the study, they were randomized to either one of three groups. Treatment as usual only, that's the control. Treatment as usual plus mindful body awareness, that's the experimental group. Or treatment as usual plus the women's health curriculum as the active and controlled condition. So for those who were randomized to either the women's health curriculum or the mindful body awareness, they then got 8 individual sessions for an hour and a half each session for 8 weeks in a row, more or less, at their clinic. And then we followed all these women for a year. So they filled out a set of questionnaires when they enrolled in the study, 12 weeks later after the interventions would have been completed, at 6 months from their enrollment, and at 12 months from their enrollment. So we've published the findings from this first enrollment period to post-intervention, which is what you have seen in terms of those results. And what we saw was that the women who received the mindful body awareness had significantly less substance use than those who were in treatment as usual only. And the women who were in the women's health curriculum also improved in their substance use. So the significant difference on substance use was only in relationship to between the mindful body awareness and treatment as usual. But what we did see was that those who got the mindful body awareness had significantly improved in their interoceptive awareness skills and their mindfulness skills if they'd gotten almost all of the intervention, which really tells us that they learned what we were teaching them. And that is important because you want to know, with such an enormously distressed sample, can they learn what you're teaching them to learn? And the answer is yes. And that's really important to know. Related to that, we also looked at depression symptoms, craving symptoms, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and emotion regulation. And some of those we saw significant improvement for mindful body awareness compared to both groups, but mostly that showed up for those who really got all of the intervention instead of just 1 or 2 sessions. What was really exciting about this study, and what I had never done before, was we looked at emotion regulation psychophysiologically. So we looked at whether the heart rate variability for these women, which tells us it's an indicator of regulatory capacity. How variable one's heartbeat is tells us that. And we looked at that at rest, and we looked at it in relationship to 3 different kinds of stressors, potential stressors. One was a film, one was rumination on a stressful event, and one was actually a body awareness meditation. And which could be stressful or not stressful. We weren't actually sure. It turns out it doesn't matter whether you've ever had mindfulness or not. Everybody found the body awareness meditation more regulating. But for those who got the mindful body awareness intervention on rest, film, rumination, and body awareness, there was a significant increase in their regulatory capacity compared to the other 2 groups. And that was really exciting to see, because there are issues with self-report on these measures, and to have to be able to see physiologically this change really supports our idea that what's happening when people learn to be more aware of their internal experience in terms of body awareness. There's been a lot to suggest that that facilitates emotion regulation. But it has not really been looked at with heart rate variability before. And it's certainly not been looked at with this population before. And so these results are really, really exciting.
Yeah, what I like is you were speaking, there are a few things that stood out. One was that you have an active control, which is, of course, always somewhat challenging when it's something like a mindfulness intervention. What is it that they do instead that has the same social effects and all the rest that might crop up? So great for that. And also that you were not just relying on self-report. That there are some biological markers that you could use to help support that. And I also appreciate, just personally, your languaging around these are indicators. And just this is one of the things that's very enriching for me about speaking with researchers is you get how science works, that this is an iterative process, that things are not, we did this one study and we're done and we know everything and it's proven. Not at all how science works. And the listeners to this podcast, if you've heard it a few times, you've heard me talk about this before. And I just wanted to thank you, Cynthia, for modeling that. It's wonderful to hear about how that worked.
Yeah, there's a lot we don't know.
Right.
We don't always know what these things really mean, right? So, yeah.
And that was also something I wanted to ask about. You had mentioned as someone doing the research how wonderful it is to see someone have these positive effects from work that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if, you're respecting the confidentialities of the specifics, that I'm making a guess that there were some really good moments, some breakthroughs, and some good experiences that people had in the program. Just with this particular study of the immediate pre and post, just within that limited time scale, how did that go for people? What was that like? And what was it like for you to be part of this?
Oh, well, I mean, you just asked a few different questions and I'll just respond to the last one first. But I mean, I have the pleasure of supervising all of the therapists who work on this study. So I get to be a fly on the wall because we audio tape every single session as a way to make sure that the intervention is being delivered as we expect, but also as a way to provide support for the therapist so that when things happen that they're not sure, what did I respond the way I should have, or this was really challenging, can you help me think through it? We can go to the tape and listen to it and really address those questions. So, the clinician in me loves that, because I really get to really see and continue to see how this work helps people, and to support therapists who are really learning to do it and to do it well. And so that's that answer to that question. But as I said earlier, some of the most striking and heartwarming kinds of stories that people really talk about is this reconnection with their bodies and sense of being able to develop to have a new set of tools in their toolbox, basically, for both self-care and regulation. Because we're asking people at the end of every session to collaboratively work with the therapist and come up with a take-home practice that they're going to do that builds on what they did in that session, and to keep track and a log. How often did you do it? For how long? Bring that back. So we collect all that data as well. And, some women, don't bother filling out the log. Their lives are chaotic. That's like beyond what they can do. And they'll just self-report verbally what they did or didn't do. And there's, the gamut in terms of the person who's so into it that they spend, a half an hour a day, every day of the week, making sure that they close the door and they really just are quiet and they're working on their practice. And there's other people that, it may be a few minutes. I mean, that's all that they have. And so we have that data, but I think it's them talking about, which is integral to the session. What did you do in your take-home practice? How did it go? What questions do you have? How do we build on that in the session today? Blah, blah, blah. That is integral to the protocol that we're doing. And so we really hear that, and we ask them to write qualitatively at the end. What did you learn? How do you think this supports your recovery if you do? So on and so forth. So people respond to that. So we are also doing a mixed method study where we're collecting not only self-report questionnaires and the psychophysiological data, but also their narrative about what their experience was. And that was mentioned in this paper. We didn't go into it in great detail, but overall, people love this work. Those who stick with it, I mean, over and over and over again, that's what they say is, I really learned how to pay attention to my emotions. I learned to spend time taking care of myself, which is not something I really haven't done very much. I've learned the connection between my physical sensations and my emotional sensations. I've learned how to meditate, which I didn't know how to do. And when I've tried, I haven't been able to before. That's another thing we hear a lot. And I think that's really, really a key thing for people who are involved in mindfulness training, is that for people who have really chaotic lives and a lot of co-occurring disorders and especially trauma histories, there can be a lot of additional supports needed. And that's why I think this individual type training can be a really fundamental first step that helps then support someone to go into more of a group kind of classroom setting or practice setting for mindfulness meditation. And we hear that from our participants.
So that's this particular published work. But what are you working on now? Because there's a continuation of this.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of ways to respond to that. So as I said, this was a year-long study. So we are very soon to be we have analyzed those results now and publishing those results too, which honestly I'm really pleased about. So what we see is that that a lot of the immediate effects of this intervention that we saw were maintained at 12 months, and some were even improved. So, for example, substance use, we have a significant difference across the whole 12 months for those who receive the mindful body awareness compared to both the control conditions, which is really significant to find something that was our primary outcome, and to actually see that we were able to have that show up a year out is a big deal. But also we see those continued improvements in interoceptive awareness and mindfulness skills, as well as emotion regulation psychophysiologically a year out. There is significant difference in regulatory capacity physiologically in those who got mindful body awareness compared to the other two groups. So these are pretty exciting results, and I'm excited to publish them. And relatedly, just got funded a few months ago to do a similar study looking at this intervention for people who are in medication-assisted for opioid use disorder. So these are people who are on buprenorphine instead of methadone. It's just a different drug. And we'll be working with men and women, unlike this study, which was women only. So I'm excited to do that because it's sort of a next step to be working in another treatment model, really, but also really interested in seeing how this works across both genders. So that's what we're doing next.
Great. Looking forward to hearing more. And I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share with listeners about your work.
About my work. Well, there's two things. I mean, the other thing that I'm working on that's fun is I'm collaborating with a neuroscientist to look at whether we see changes in the brain also related interceptive processing with this intervention, which if we do will help us understand even more what we're affecting, I hope. So that's exciting. And the other thing is that I have a nonprofit that's separate from my work at the university. I mean, they overlap, but it's separate in the sense that I'm really trying to help more clinicians learn this approach. And so I'm doing more teaching and working with clinics and service agencies to really try and bring this work into the services that they provide. So that's my other hat, and one I'm really excited about, because it's really about equity. How do we bring this work to more people, and people who otherwise actually would really have very little opportunity to experience it?
Exactly. Well, for those who are listening, I'll be linking to that nonprofit as well as the work we've been talking about today. Our guest today, Cynthia Price. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.